Mike sitting back there. All right.
Thanks.
Okay, they're ready for you. All right, put it. All right, well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. This is, as Dr. Turner said, my second part of my presentation, and it's actually 3 parts. So this is we're halfway there. And last time, like you said, we talked about the ancient world. It's all about war. That's basically, you got that right. It's the whole thing is about war. The evolution of naval land warfare in the ancient world. I'm just splitting it into 3 different parts, time parts. So it's not that much information for each one. So this time we're going to talk about classical antiquity, and I'm going to define that so you know exactly what time period that makes up. So let's get started with this one. And if you remember from last time, basically, well, this is my senior thesis project. So what this is basically choosing a topic that involves some kind of change or evolution, and just research about it. So I chose this topic, which of course involves evolution, change, and what I decided to do was to find the patterns that led to this evolution, the patterns that can explain these changes. And I told you also last class that history is all about patterns, just as the study of warfare is also all about patterns. These are the ones that will allow us to understand why and how things happen, and not so much predict the future, not quite that, but it will definitely allow us to be prepared for it. We know what's coming, sort of. So that's my whole goal with this project, and so far I've been able to identify and label 4 different patterns throughout all my research, and I'm going to show them to you right now, and then I'm going to talk about them throughout the rest of the presentation. So these 4 ones that I have found so far, I'm sure I've come across more of them in the future. The first one is up here is a tweaking pattern, and that word tweaking, I gave it that word just so it's kind of easier to remember. By tweaking, you always, well, I think of making little adjustments. Probably that's a key word there, adjustment. And we talked about this one the last time. If you remember, a good example about it was, for example, the Assyrians. When we talked about the Assyrians, that they were so powerful and the army was so strong they could not be defeated in an open field battle. So what happened? Their enemies kind of followed this pattern and adapted. They made that little twist, the little tweak in their strategy. So they decided not to go fight the Assyrians in the open field anymore, but rather they fell back to their fortress and cities. So they had to adjust. So that was one pattern, and which I saw in this second part. And that's also, well, before I keep going on, that is something that I waited till the second presentation to give you these patterns that I have discovered so far, because I kind of wanted to like double check them. It was the first time I found them, but I wanted to keep going to the next period to see if they were still true for the next time period, and most of them are. So that's how I kind of know I'm on the right path. The second one is, I called it the techie pattern, and you see the word hidden there. Techie stands for technology. Technology, and this one, today we're going to add another level to it, but in the last presentation that I made, we talked about a lot of technological achievements. We talked about, one of them was, for example, the chariot. The chariot, like I told you, was the ruler of the battlefields in the early antiquity, and it was how it was pulled in the beginning by asses, and then it was pulled by horses. And we also talked about the bow, how it was just a piece of wood with string, and then it evolved. There was a technological development into the compound bow, which was stronger, more accurate, and it could shoot at a further distance. And we also talked about, well, the most important one was the transition from bronze to iron. That was definitely the most important technical evolution of the ancient world, because iron was still used for the next 20 centuries after that, probably more than that, 30 centuries probably. So that was definitely one of the most important ones. And like I said, today we're going to add another level to this one that I think fits into that pattern. The third one that I found and labeled so far is the sponge pattern, and I gave it this name so also so you can remember it easier. Sponge, what I mean by that is absorb. That's what a sponge does, it absorbs. And that's a pattern that I found, that a lot of civilizations have evolved by absorbing culture, or in this case, warfare kind of traditions or techniques from other cultures. We talk about the Assyrians, again, how they absorbed the use of cavalry from one of their common enemies, which were the Scythians, who were master horsemen. So they saw how they fought them for many years. They saw how useful cavalry was in the battlefield, so they decided to adopt it. They absorbed that for themselves, and then they implemented that into their own army. So that's another pattern. You know, usually when they go out and they fight people who are better than them, they usually absorb what they think is best. So that's how they keep evolving. They absorb from other people. And the last one that I have identified so far is I call it the geek pattern. And you know, just that word you're all familiar with, it's basically that. Geek referring to like some smart, really brilliant person. And this one deals mainly with specific personalities, or a small group of people with brilliant minds that have completely shaped, well, they have made warfare evolve, and they're therefore significantly changed. This pattern is probably the most significant one, because the evolutions that come out of this pattern are the ones that have the biggest impact, and also the ones that stay the longest. And you know, the last time we really didn't see a lot of characters. We probably talk about Sargon, maybe. He would be one. Probably some of the pharaohs that fought certain battles for Egypt, or the Hittites, but there wasn't really a lot of this pattern in the past. It's in this one and the next presentation that they will really stand out, starting today. So you will really get to see a lot of that pattern. So with those four things in mind, I kept going in my research, and like I said, I'm going to define to you what classical antiquity is. Last time we left off with the Assyrians around the year, probably the 7th century, around that time. That's when the Assyrian Empire fell. They were very big, they were very strong, but they overexpanded kind of, so their enemies multiplied. There were too many, they just were overwhelmed. And one of the empires that did that were the Persians, and we'll talk about in a few minutes. So this is what classical antiquity is. From the 8th or 7th century BC all the way to the end of the ancient world, 476 AD, which is the fall of the Western Roman Empire. And today we're going to talk about these three civilizations up top: the Persians, the Greeks, and the Macedonians. And this is, I'm sure you're familiar with at least a couple of those. And this is the time also known as the Golden Age of Greece. This is the time where Homer wrote the Iliad, which is a story of the Trojan War, which I'm sure you all read at some point. This is also the time of the great Greek philosophers: Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, the writers, Sophocles, Demosthenes, Heraclitus, mathematicians with, what's his name? I forget his name. But anyways, this was the time of the great Pericles, who was also the governor. So this is the Golden Age of Greece, and also Macedonia, which is kind of Greek, but not quite. I'll tell you later about that. And the ones at the bottom are the ones we're going to leave for the third and last presentation: Carthaginians, Romans, and barbarians, which are many different groups, but usually they're encompassed into a single group. So this is so you know in what time period we are right now. So starting with it, like I said, the Assyrians fell to, they were called the Medes back then. And you can see that word right there in the middle, Media. That was the kingdom of the Medes. And they were defeated by Cyrus the Great, which was the first great Persian emperor, or king. They had king, more of. And so basically, all of a sudden, he has this huge empire, by far the largest empire on earth at that point. It went all the way from Greece to Egypt, and all through Anatolia, the Middle East, all the way to the borders with India and China. So it was a pretty big empire. And regarding warfare, we see a lot of evolution coming out of this. This is where we start seeing the first great shift in the way battles were fought. So, talking about evolution, these are some of the things that the Persian Empire introduced and evolved, and most of them stuck around for many, many centuries. So the first one is right here to the left, mercenaries. Mercenary, if you don't know what it is basically a person who's paid to do a certain job, kind of. So, of course, in warfare, we would refer to a mercenary would be someone you paid for to fight. You paid him to fight for you. And usually they're very high-skilled men, or a group of men. They are very well trained, very well equipped. They really don't have allegiance to anybody. They just put the money, I guess. So this is the first time this is not the first time mercenaries were used. Mercenaries have been used for years, but this is the first time when they're being used in mass scale. A big chunk of the Persian army would be mercenaries. And that says two things about them. First of all, it says that they have money, and they have a lot of it. But it also says that their regular army is not as strong to hold the other guys, so they need mercenaries to be able to survive. And that is a weakness that the Greeks will spot, and they will definitely exploit in the future. And this kind of pattern will fall into the this one would be the first one, which was the what's the first one? No, I got it. Let me go back. Yeah, thanks for reminding me. The tweaking pattern. That's where it will fall. It was out of need, basically. They needed to survive. They needed them to not get killed by the other army, so they had to adjust. They had to make that little tweak, that little twist in their army. Then we have immortals, which I'm sure you're familiar with. If you saw the movie 300, you probably remembered those guys from that movie. But of course, they were nothing like you see them in the movie. They were not masked. They were not wearing masks, and they had disfigured faces or anything. This is really how an immortal looked like. This is a mosaic from Persia. And you know, the important thing about this, guys, was that this definitely falls into the Taki pattern. And this is the next level that we're going to add, that at this point in warfare, it was really all about organization. Pretty much all the, well, I'll talk about that in a minute, but pretty much immortals were so exclusive because they were the elite warriors. This is probably the first elite group in history, and they were 10,000 of them. They were pretty much the royal guard of the king, but they also fought, they participated in many battles, and they were so important, they were so elite because they could do all three jobs at once. They could handle the spear, the sword, and the bow and the arrow at the same time. So instead of having those three separate groups in your army, all you needed was a single group of immortals, and they could do all that and very, very well. They could do it very well. So they could do all those three things at once, so that's why they were elite warriors. And again, these were not the first elite warriors in history. Before you had royalty were usually the elite warriors. But this is like the first body of non-royalty soldiers that really conform a big elite group. And the reason why they called immortals was because they were always, their numbers would never drop before 10,000. So every time one of them died or couldn't participate in a battle, it would be immediately replaced. So their numbers never dropped below 10,000. So that's what they were called, immortals. And lastly, over there we have the trireme. That is the name that kind of ship receives. And that wasn't quite Persian, but the reason I put it there was because the Persians had to face those. Those were Greeks. Those were a Greek invention. Well, actually a development. Warfare in the naval warfare at the beginning it was just boats pretty much shooting at each other, trying to set the other one on fire, and maybe get close to it and board it. So that was pretty much what naval warfare was. Very disorganized. The boats were not really big, and it was not that very common. But when the triremes show up, it completely changed the way naval warfare was carried. If you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but like the nose of the ship, it has like a little nose, like a pointy thing sticking out. That had, at the front of it, it had iron. It was like an iron point, or like that's what it was, a pointed iron piece. And basically, what they would do now is use it to ram the enemy ships. So they would just sail right at them, straight at them, and ram them, and that would make a hole in the hull of the ship, and it would eventually sink. So it was no longer about shooting the other guys, burning the ship, or trying to take it over. It was just about ramming them. So that developed a whole new level of strategy and tactics and logistics for naval warfare. And the Persians lost many battles to those ships. And that's definitely a technological pattern that is followed there. You have iron now, which is much more resistant. Before that, you really couldn't use any material. Wood, when it's in constant contact with the water, it's not very useful. It softens a lot. Bronze is not really going to hold up too much. So it wasn't until iron was available that they were able to develop this. So again, these patterns kind of support each other, and they keep showing up over and over. And now, like I was saying before, at this point, developments in warfare were all about organization rather than technology. So the technological pattern is no longer about developing new things. At this point in history, from this point on, you almost had things, well, technology-wise, things are going to stay pretty much the same. You already have the most powerful bow, which is a compound bow, the most powerful metal, which is iron, the most powerful auxiliary tools, kind of, which are the horses, cavalry. So technology at this point kind of stopped evolving, and now everybody had the same. So it was, to gain the advantage, it was a matter of organization, and that's when we start seeing armies get organized. This is a picture of the movie Alexander, which I don't know if you saw, but this is this chart down here. I put it so you can kind of get an idea of how organization started to play a big role in warfare. I mean, I'm not going to really go through this, but as you can see, depending on the number of troops, each one would have a name, each unit would have a name, and there would be a title for the commander. So this shows you how they were starting to organize the army, so it wouldn't just be a mob just going out there and fighting the other guys. It was more of an organized event, and they had to do this, like I said, because technology was not going to grant you any more advantages, because the opponents you were facing most likely had the same technology that you did. So it was a matter of who could organize each other better. And actually, to do that, I mean, explaining it is one thing, but I guess you can understand better if you see it. So let me use use a little software to show you how that would be. So think of it this way. If you have this massive army, this is pretty much how things used to be at the beginning. Just a big blob of people. You see they're not very well armored. They got pitchforks, basically. They're not really organized. You see they don't have a formation. You don't see squares. You don't see general in front. You don't see auxiliary troops. You don't see cavalry. You don't see archers. It's just a big blob, and fighting an army just the same, basically. So that's all you see. And at this point, since technology, since they're pretty much the same, it all comes down to the individual combats. There's no organization, no auxiliary troops. They're pretty much fighting people who are equal to them. So at this point, it's really unpredictable who would win. And this is how battles were fought before organization played a big role in them. So, go ahead.
So that'd be under the geek pattern, or would that be under?
The organization, I would consider it under technical pattern, because it's technical. I will explain that later, because actually I did want to make that point. So at this point, this is how it all went down. You really couldn't tell who was going to win. It was just a matter of individual combat, and you can see that not only in warfare but also in literature. If you read the Iliad, like I said, you don't get to see how the generals fought the battles, or how the generals decided to take the city or anything like that. All you really read about are individual combats. The epic combats between Achilles and Achilles and Hector and Ajax, and that's all it was about, individual bravery and individual skill. But now that all of that is usually equal in armies, it comes down to organization. So let me show you how it was when the Persians kind of developed this. So they still had this mob of infantry, but they started adding the auxiliary troops. They got their archers and the chariots, like we saw last time. Chariots play a big role. So now you're going to see that even when they fight the same odds, the same amount of enemies, they are able to come out on top just out of organization. It doesn't matter how, because technology-wise they're very similar, so it's really all a matter of organization. So you just let me show you real quick how different it is when you combine all these things. So basically, it's the same thing now. If you remember, like we talked about it, the Persians had chariots, which you can see right here. They were pretty deadly. You can see they have some blades on the sides. Those were basically meant to cut people in half, kind of. And I mean, you're probably going to get to see some of that action here. So, you know, now it's not about just throwing everything you got out there and see who wins. Now it's a matter of using strategy and tactics, organization. So this is what they used to do. They would always throw the chariots first. And this you can see from the movie Alexander, like I said, if you saw that movie, that really depicts it very well. They throw the chariots out there because they're very heavy, and you see people fly and they just get killed and massacred by the chariots. So this was the whole purpose of the first charge of the chariots, to just confuse the enemy infantry, to just make a whole mess in them. And then once that happened, then the infantry came in. They had support from the archers on the sides. You see the archers there, just firing their arrows, just getting as many kills as they can. So, you know, at this point, this is when it gets to a matter of organization. It was no longer just, at this point, you could, before the battle, you could easily see who was going to win. You know, it was not a matter of luck, like, or kind of luck, as it was in the past, because now organization would make the whole difference. So this is kind of what I wanted to show you, so you can get like a better look at it, a better, you know, graphical description of it, and this is pretty much how battles were at this point. Let's see if we can end it here. Okay, so coming back to this. While that was happening in Persia, across the Aegean Sea, you had the Greeks. And at this point, the Greeks were fighting each other. It's called the Peloponnesian Wars. And this is where we really start to see the geek pattern. And from this point on till the end of this period, ancient history, you will see it every time. At every timeline, there will be some kind of brilliant mind that will stand out. At this point, it was that guy right there that you see, Epaminondas. So basically, just to summarize, the Peloponnesian Wars were a conflict between city-states, mainly Sparta and Athens. They were fighting each other, and each one had its own allies. And Sparta was after that war, of course, Sparta won, and now they were fighting the Thebans, who were trying to rise to power. And the Thebans had this general, Epaminondas, in charge of their army. And you know, what basically happened, what you're seeing here is this kind of animation is from the Battle of Leuctra in, I think it was 371 BC, I mean before Christ. And what happened here is, again, a matter of organization. You're really, you know, Thebans and Spartans were better trained, actually. They were a warrior society, but, you know, their equipment was just as good as that of the Thebans. There really wasn't a clear advantage other than the training that the Spartans had. But here, Epaminondas was able to defeat them, not only in this battle, but Martinia, which was fought a few years later. He defeated the Spartans again using organization, strategy, and tactics. So basically what you see here is exactly what happened in the battle. The green line are the Spartans, the blue ones are the Thebans. Usually they would just line up in front of each other and clash in the middle, and you know, it would usually be the Spartans. What used to happen at this time, tradition was that you would put your most veteran troops, your finest troops, on the right flank. So this block right here was, this block were the Spartians, the best of the Spartans, and this one should be the best of the Thebans, which was called the Sacred Band. What Epaminondas did was he knew that he needed something else to defeat the Spartans. Like one-on-one, he was going to get crushed. So this is what he did. He devised a kind of an alteration of the phalanx. The phalanx, I'm going to explain to you in a second, that's the formation in which the Greeks used to fight. And it would be 8 ranks deep. That's the standard formation for the phalanx, 8 ranks deep. He moved it to 50 ranks deep. He took men for the first line. From all these lines, he took some men from the back and put everybody over here, facing exactly the best Spartan troops. So basically what happened was, when both armies clashed, the strategy started to pay off, because all these men, all this pressure could not be held by this few men, because they were vastly outnumbered on that flank. And that's exactly what happened. What you see here, when both lines clash, all the pressure from these 50 ranks deep couldn't be held by this guy. So it breaks on the left, and then it keeps rolling all the way to the right, and eventually the Spartan army collapsed. So even being inferior in quality, he was able to come out on top just by using organization, strategy, and tactics. So this is what it's all about at this point: organization, and that is a technical pattern, as I have seen it. And this is the picture I was talking about. After Epaminondas, well, the Thebans rose to power, and they were so powerful that pretty much every Greek city-state was sending hostages to them, just men to get educated. Well, not exactly educated, but they would be sent probably as hostages or gifts, a tribute kind of, and because of course you want to be friends with the most powerful ones, right? So one of the ones who was sent there was this guy, Philip II, who was the son of the king of Macedonia at that point. And he spent his time as a hostage over there studying the military tactics and strategies of the Thebans. That's how he spent his time, and he did a great job, because a few years later, when he became king of Macedonia, and will be known as Philip II of Macedonia, then he would completely change warfare forever. He created the most powerful war machine of the ancient world at this point. The army that he created had no match in history, and I mean, that's why that army was able to probably go in the most successful and impressive military campaign ever, and we will talk about it in a second. So just so you get the picture over there, that's what the traditional Greek formation was. The phalanx over there, 8 ranks deep, 800 men long. That's probably a line of 1 mile, a mile-long line of men. And that was a formation that was used by most Greek armies. And Philip, again, following the Greek pattern with his own brilliant mind, he decided, well, no, he realized that this had potential problems. And he learned all of these from another guy who followed the pattern, which was Epaminondas, the guy we saw earlier. Basically, what he did was what I call the combination of these patterns. As you can see it at the top, he combined the sponge and the geek pattern. First, he absorbed everything that Epaminondas knew. He learned everything. He absorbed all the knowledge from the Thebans, and then used it and put it to work with his own brilliant mind. And then he spotted some of the weaknesses of this formation. This formation is very inflexible. It's very, how to put it, it's very slow. It's very powerful, but it's very slow. It's not flexible at all. And he saw that as a big problem, and it really was a big problem. And so basically what he did was, actually let me show you, because that might give you a better idea of why is it that he needed to kind of change it. So this is what happened. These guys are how the phalanx used to be. These guys are the ones that he created. So basically, these are some of the flaws that he realized were part of that phalanx. First of all, is a line that is very long, a mile long, in just one unit. So, they all have spears, which they lower, and that's just a wall of spears. So from the front, they're very strong. They're almost invulnerable from the front. But if somebody tries to flank them, try to go to the sides, how do you turn a mile-long line on time to face that threat. And you can't divide, you can't split it because you don't have officers in the middle to command them, you know, and it's just going to be chaos. So he realized that as long as you could fight from the front, you would be okay. But if you were ever flanked, that would probably be your doom. So he realized that was one problem. The second problem was that the flanking was very hard because, you know, they usually wouldn't go to war with just one phalanx. They would have several of these. So the battlefront would be extremely long. So it wasn't easy to flank them. But the other option was, if they were not going to get flanked, all they had to do was the same thing that Epaminondas did to the Spartans. They had to concentrate all their strength on one single spot. And, you know, this is a very thin line. It's just 8 men deep. It would break very easily. And if it breaks, they get into the rear of the formation, and pretty much the line breaks. So he realized all these problems. He started thinking about it. He realized about them. And he decided he needed to change it, and this is his creation. This is the evolution that he made from the phalanx, called the syntagma. That is what the Macedonian army would use from then on. The syntagma was a formation much more compact, smaller. This was 16 by 16, that means 256 men per square, and each phalanx would have 64 of these squares. So that would give like 16,000 men per phalanx, something like that. It was completely organized. So with this, he solved many of the problems that the phalanx was facing. So let me show you why this formation is way better than the other one that you saw earlier. So basically, look at it this way. This could be a phalanx right here. You know, a very thin line. Well, this is not 8 lines deep, this is like half of it. But a very thin line is very, very long. Yes, it is long, but it's very, very thin. And what happens if an enemy is coming through this direction and is trying to flank you? You have to turn this whole unit. And if you're trying to turn it to face that way, see how long it takes them. They have to reform.
That's too much.
They have to keep going. Even if they're trying to run, they have to keep going. You know, it took them a long time because it's a line. They have their center of gravity is very, very small. If you look at the phalanx, at the syntagma, excuse me, you're trying to turn them, it almost takes them no time. All they have to do is lift their spears, turn around. And there you go. They're ready to turn. So you see how quickly that it was? That was much more quicker. And you know, this was just one flank. Now try to turn the whole thing. You know, that's going to take a minute. So so you know, this is some of the things that he spotted, and he was able to really put into practice, and that's why this formation was so superior to the other Greeks, and that's why he was able to beat all the Greeks and of course the Persians, which we will talk about in 1 second. So that's just so you get an idea of how brilliant he was, and that's just the geek pattern. This was never done before. This was all his own device. And so this was the first part of this was the core of the Macedonian army, the infantry. That was the core of it. But he realized also that this phalanx was, as much as it was strong from the front, it was still very vulnerable on the sides. And well, actually, for the last word on the organization, he, like I said, if you can't split the long phalanx because you don't have officers in the middle, he took that into account. So basically, this is what would happen. This guy right here, he was called the syntagmatarch. That was the kind of the leader of the syntagma. But then at the same time, he knew that at some point, if they were threatened from the back, this whole thing had to turn. But rather than going around it, all they had to do was turn around, and then this guy would take charge. You know, so that's how he solved it. Instead of having them turn all the way, just turn around 180 degrees, and then this guy would take charge. And then if he ever had to split it in half, of course 16 times divided by 2 is 8. So this line, if he had ever to split them in 2, he had 2 officers, one here, and I think the other one was right here, that would take charge of each of the divisions. So he had pretty much everything calculated. This was a much more flexible formation, and you know, it allowed him to rule the battlefields. And like I was saying, he realized that as strong as he was from the front, he was very vulnerable on the sides. So he created this body of soldiers called the high pacifists. And these guys were basically what you would call auxiliary troops, but they were elite auxiliary troops. There were 3,000 of them in the Macedonian army, and they had shorter spears. They were mostly trained for hand-to-hand combat, and these guys, their job was to protect the flanks of the formation. So now the enemy was in a rough position, because if they charge up front the phalanx, they're going to get massacred. That's the strongest point of the phalanx. But now they try to go around it, they would have to fight these guys who were elite warriors. So he was just leaving the enemy without any options. And to make it even more interesting, he also created this. And this is probably the most important element of the Macedonian army. This is the companion cavalry. And this is the first time I think I mentioned it in the other presentation. Cavalry before this time was merely auxiliary. They were just there to kind of help wherever it was needed. Wherever you need to, whenever something was needed, cavalry would go there. And yes.
Why do they got cheetah over there?
Oh, it's not cheetah. That's leopard fur. They use it because the smell of that would kind of scare the enemy horses, and they would pretty much go like amok, kind of. That's what they use it. So, but actually, they usually wore it on over the left shoulder. Here they're using it as a saddle, I guess, but they would usually wear it on them. So, okay. Oh, yeah. Like I was saying, so this is important because this is the first shock cavalry in the ancient world, and from this point on, you would see real cavalry charges like the ones you see in the movies, like when they would ride very high speeds and they just clash against the enemy. Before this, cavalry, like I said, was just to support the flanks, to just it'd be to chase the archers, to chase the enemies who were routing. They would not play a big role. In this time, at this point in history, the companion cavalry became absolutely crucial, and actually it was the key in every single battle that the Macedonians won. So from this point on, cavalry became a crucial part of battlefields in the open field, and it was all credited to Philip II. He created this body of companions. So basically, this is how the Macedonian army was composed. Very strong infantry whose only weakness was being taken care of by the high pacifists, and then they also had the surprise element, which was heavy cavalry, something that has not been used before. And if you can, let's put it into action. I'm going to show you how effective it was, because you really need to see Macedonians in action. So there's a body of infantry, the main body of infantry. These are the high pacifists, which we've got the flanks. They also have archers, and this is the companion cavalry. And the Persian army, they will always outnumber the Macedonians. Always outnumber them. And the important thing about that is that the Macedonian army, Philip designed it specifically to deal with numerically superior armies. He knew he was going to be outnumbered most of the times, so that's why he designed it that way. And like you can see here, even though we're vastly outnumbered, that still doesn't quite matter, because the troops are superior, and every single variable has been taken care of. So you see right here, even though they're outnumbered, they can still come out on top. And like I said before, the key element to the victories of the Macedonians was the cavalry. Basically, the strategy that Philip used was that the infantry will only serve a defensive purpose. They will only be there to hold the enemy infantry, and then the damage would be done by the cavalry. So that's why it was heavy cavalry, and that's why it was shock cavalry. You cannot have auxiliary cavalry trying to make a big difference in the battle. So here you can see they would use this formation. This is also credited to him. This is called the wedge formation or delta formation. This resembles the Greek letter delta. And you know, this is what they would do. They would just do massive charges on one side. They would just crush everything on that side and just start rolling to the other side. And at the same time, like I said, the infantry didn't have to kill anybody. They were just there to hold them. You see here, they're not really killing them. They don't have to kill them. They just have to hold them until the cavalry can get back. And you see here, if they were ever trying to flank them, they had the high pacifists who were supporting them. So you see here, this flank is completely exposed, but it doesn't matter because the support troops are right here to cover that flank. And you see on the other side, the cavalry are still causing chaos over there, and all they have to do is really come back. You see here, you really don't see who's winning. They're just holding the line, waiting for the cavalry to come back. And here they are. They come back, and here they will use this. This is probably the most famous tactic of the ancient world, hammer and anvil. That's what it's called, because it resembles the active hammer and an anvil. And you see, as soon as they clash with that body of infantry, they start running. See, so this was Macedonian strategy. Hold the line with your infantry, which is superior, and just do all the damage with the cavalry. And he was able to do that, and pretty much there was no counter for it at this point in history. This is how the Persians would fight, with big numbers. Just their armies would be huge, but they would not have as much quality as the Macedonian army would. So they really had no chance at doing it. And like I said, it was not only because they were superior, but it was designed to fight superior numbers. And it all came together with this guy, Alexander the Great. This is Philip II's son. Alexander the Great, I'm sure you've all heard about him. He is, I would say, he's the greatest general that's ever lived. You know, that's questionable, but he's definitely up there. Out of the greatest generals in history, this is probably the only one who died undefeated. You know, Julius Caesar lost, Hannibal lost, Napoleon lost, Rommel lost. Alexander was the only one who didn't lose a single battle. And you know, the success of Alexander is pretty much, in a way, it's luck. He was just the right person at the right place at the right time. You know, he had a royal status. He had the best teacher money could buy. Aristotle was his teacher from the time he was 13. His dad, Philip, was the best military general of the time, and he handed him the best army in the world at that time. So, you know, everything was kind of put into place for him to do what he did. And this is basically a summary of his military campaign. This is Macedon, this is where he started, and he conquered the whole Persian Empire, Egypt, and all the way into India and China. And these little kind of diagrams that you see are his 4 most important battles, which, I mean, I'm not going to go over them, but they're a great display of military brilliance, and that still comes back to the geek pattern. You know, this is stuff that him and his body of officers came up with, and you know, they were split-second decisions some of the time. If you saw the movie Alexander, you see how at the end of this battle, Gaugamela, he had to make the choice between chasing the king who was running from the battlefield, or coming back to assist Parmenion on the left flank, where he was having problems. So, you know, it was just, his wit was right on target, and that's how he managed to do all the great things he did. And coming back to evolution of warfare, we get a lot of things out of Alexander, a lot of things. And he was actually the first one to introduce a concept known as psychological warfare. And psychological warfare basically means, I guess you could define it as winning a battle without actually fighting it. To break the will of the enemy to fight, not to fight them, just break their will to fight. And you know, he was a master of this. And it's probably the first time it was being used, true. And one of the examples when that happened was, well, what he would usually do is, after a battle, after he took some town or something, he would make sure the word spread around. He would send their scouts up in front to every single town that he knew he was going to go through and tell them, hey, you know, Alexander's coming. And he would always give them the option of surrendering, allow them to keep their own culture, their own governors, and just basically just respond to him as a king. And you know, if they surrendered, he would treat them kindly. If they didn't, he would kill them. Basically, that it was black and white for him. So you know, most people would just surrender. That's what Egypt did. Egypt did that after this. This you see up here, there's two pictures. That is the siege of Tyre. By far my favorite one in history, and you know, it's worth mentioning because it's just incredible how he achieved that. Tyre was at the time, without a doubt, the mightiest fortress in the ancient world, and it was because it wasn't an island. You know, there was a continent, and then I think it was 500 feet away there was an island, and there was the fortress. So you couldn't even reach it by land, and they have a pretty powerful fleet. So there was no way anybody would think that fortress would ever fall. When Alexander got there, he offered them to surrender. They didn't want to. So he decided to attack them. He was going to besiege the city. And you know, he basically, as crazy as it sounds, he joined the land with the island by doing this. It took him 7 months, well, for his engineers and his army to build, well, it was one failed attempt and 7 months to build basically a platform, a bridge from the land to the island. And he would use these big towers, siege towers with the catapults, which were also a technological achievement at that point. And that's how he eventually got to the walls, threw all his siege equipment over there, assaulted the city. Then he managed to get some allied ships to defeat the fleet or distract them. It's just a display of brilliancy. And he eventually managed to conquer the city of Tyre. So, you know, after that epic siege, when they send word to Egypt that Tyre has fallen to Alexander, and they say, oh, by the way, he's coming here, well, they're pretty much, they don't want to fight. You know, they're just going to open his arms, and that's what they did. Egypt surrendered without a fight. As soon as Alexander got there, they embraced him as a liberator. They named him Pharaoh. So that's just psychological warfare. And actually, there's a better example, and this is one of my favorite stories about Alexander. When he was here, let me show you the map so you know what I'm talking about. Right here, this area is called Subdiana. That is almost at the border with China. And when he got there, there was a fortress at the top of the rock. It was called the Sogdian Rock. And it was literally a mountain, just a rock, with the fortress on top of it. So there was no way Alexander could get siege equipment all over there because there were no ramps. It was just a mountain of rock, you know, and the fortress at the top. So of course when he got there, again, he asked for surrender. They didn't surrender. They laughed at him. They said, and they told him when they were talking about the terms, they told him, well, we're not going to surrender. If you want to beat us, you're going to have to find soldiers that can fly. So what did Alexander do? That night, Alexander went to the surrounding area, the towns that surrounded the city, and you know, this is hilly terrain. All of this area is full of hills and mountains, so they're pretty expert climbers at that time, at that area. So what he did, he went to all these towns and places around the city, the Sogdian Rock, and he hired 300 of the best climbers he could find. He gathered them and he told them, I need you to climb all the way to the rock by the morning. You're going to do it at night. I need you to be up there by morning. And of course, he offered them a great pay for those who managed to get at the top. And I think they tried it, and I think only 30 or 50 got to the top out of the 300. But eventually, some of them got to the top. So the next morning, when the guy in charge of the defense of the Sogdian Rock comes out, and he sees that the Macedonians are already at the wall, he comes out, he can't believe it, and Alexander comes up and he tells him, you know, I found a soldier that could fly. He surrendered the city right there. He didn't even give up a fight. He just couldn't believe it. And you know, that's psychological warfare. He didn't, just by doing that little trick that he had to come up with in one night, he managed to defeat what I don't think he could have done with a military assault. You know, there was no way he could get siege weapons over there, so he just found a way around it. That's why he was a military genius. And that is psychological warfare, something that he's credited for to be the first one to use. And you know, he did many other things, like I mentioned over there. That's the another picture from the movie. That's the cavalry that would fight. This was the first time cavalry was being used as a shock force. And of course, this is just to represent Hellenism. A Hellenistic period. That is a period from the death of Alexander in 323 all the way till the Romans, until the Romans took Greece. And you know, it's very influential because from this we will see the patterns repeat themselves again. We will see a sponge pattern all over the territory that Alexander conquered. All the cultures that will develop after. Okay, when Alexander died, his empire split in 5 parts. It's called the diadoch, something like that, period, and it split in 5. And eventually, when those generals died, it kept splitting and splitting, and you know, eventually it collapsed. But the Hellenistic culture never left. So you will see, it's not very strange to see that all of these cultures that came after Alexander in all the territories that he conquered, they still had Greek culture. Some of them still spoke Greek, some of them worshipped Greek gods, and mostly, because most of what they saw about Alexander was their army. You know, he was there for conquest. So you will see that most of these cultures fought in a way like the Macedonians used to do. They adopted the phalanx formation. They would use cavalry, heavy cavalry, and they would develop it to the heaviest cavalry, which were the cataphracts. And you know, it was all the influence from Alexander. They just absorbed everything, and I mean, it's natural. You know, he's the best military commander in history, so you might as well take as much as you can from him. So that's it for Alexander, and you know, this will be the end of this period. This is classical antiquity. This is pretty much how, this is not where it ends, but this is where they split it. The last one will be late antiquity, and this basically concerns the rise and the fall of Rome. You know, how they rose fighting the Carthaginians in the what are they called, the Punic Wars. How they rose from there, and then how they went through all the emperors, Julius Caesar, Octavius, Mark Antony, Trajan, the Antonians. All the things that you know about Rome will come up in the next one. So I guess that will be it for today, and I will see you here in like 3 weeks. Thank you.
Turn the lights on, please. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Gonzalez? Oh, man.
What's that? Is that like a game that you bought?
Yeah, that's what I'm
That's on hot.
Yeah, it's like a game.
Yeah, it's a game / battle simulator. Because I mean, it was usually a game, but since it was like so realistic, they modded it so it would become more accurate. So if you go to like, I think it's the History Channel and the Discovery Channel, they use it for some documentaries. Like if they trying to, I know I saw the one about when the movie 300 came out, the History Channel made a documentary on it, and they used this game to recreate the battle with, you know, the vast armies and the maps. Because you can build the map exactly as you want, place the troops wherever you want, any number of troops that you want. So they use it to recreate
Is
battles.
it a computer game where I gotta go online?
No, it's a computer game. You have to buy it, but I think it's like $10 now.
And it's called Rome?
It's called Rome Total War.
That's called niggas on first.
That's nice. Do they have a, I guess my question is, do they have another version that beyond just Rome?
They have this for Rome. They have medieval times. Then they have the age of exploration, which is basically from the 16th to the 18th century. They have the Napoleonic era, and they have the Shogun area in Japan. So I'm not really a fan of
The Shogun?
Shogun. So yeah, I'm not really a fan of Japanese culture. So, but yeah, they have Rome, medieval, and contemporary times, all the way to Napoleon.
So basically, you can find this online.
You can buy them all online, yes. This is one of the oldest ones. This is almost 10 years old. The newest one is the one from Napoleon. That might be a little bit more expensive, but yeah, all of them, and they're used by the History Channel and the Discovery Channel to recreate battles and documentaries. And those are on YouTube, I think. So you can watch them over there. You have a question?
Yeah, how long was the battles like?
How long did they last?
Yeah.
Well, for example, Alexander battles. Let me show you this one. At this point, the battles would not last longer than a day. But what you have to understand is that when you say a battle, it's not always the fighting, because you cannot fight for days. You can only fight for a few hours before you become exhausted. You're wearing armor and swords and equipment that's probably between 30 and 50 pounds. You're fighting in the desert, because all of this is desert. You can't fight for hours. So by the battle, they mean from the moment when the armies kind of come close together, they start maneuvering around it, getting to position, then they fight sometimes, or they might have some skirmishes. They just throw like scouting groups just to see what they have, where they are, what they're doing. They might have little like skirmishes on one side, and then once they're ready, then there comes the big battle, like the pitch battle. And that only lasts, I think Gaugamela lasted 4 hours. I know this one lasted 2 hours. This one, Hydaspes, this one lasted probably 6 hours because there was a break in between. And that actually went overnight because Alexander deployed across the river overnight. And then he fought in the morning, then he fought in the afternoon. So, the actual fighting was only a few hours, but the whole battle, it probably take a few days. And this is at this time. And if you go to World War II or the Napoleonic areas, it could take weeks for a battle. Like I know Gettysburg, for example, in the Civil War, Gettysburg took a few days. And it was just fighting, then they would cease the fighting, continue the next day, the next day, the next day. So it was kind of divided, yes.
Okay, 2 questions. Who was it that was seized? Who would go out into the middle and just be like, all right, we're done fighting for the day. Pick it up tomorrow.
Yeah, I was thinking that too.
That's a good question.
Usually, did you see movie Troy? Did you see that?
A long time ago. So I don't remember.
Okay, basically, what happened was that at some point, for example, when they're fighting that movie, when that movie in Troy, they're fighting one day in the morning, and then Patroclus, which is Achilles' friend, not his cousin, like they say in the movie, he comes out disguised as Achilles. Everybody thinks it's Achilles, but he's not. He comes out. Of course, Hector, who is the best of the Trojans, wants to fight him. Eventually, they meet in the middle. They start a fight, and Hector kills Patroclus. So at that time, everybody just stopped fighting, because it was like a shocking moment where the best of the Greeks fell, and the Trojans just killed the best of the Greeks. So at that time, it was like a truce, kind of. And the other thing you have to realize is that a lot of these fighting would, if they sometimes they stop, it would not be because somebody told them. What you have to understand is that most of the battles take place because the generals decide they will take place. A lot of the time the soldiers don't know what's going on. They're just told to fight, and they fight. They really don't hate the guy across the battlefield. They really don't care who he is. They don't care what he does. So if they tell them to fight, they just fight. So that's basically what happens sometimes. If they see that the battle is going badly or that there's no point in keep fighting, they kind of would just stop. It comes to an agreement, kind of. But most of the times, at this point, battles didn't stop. Like I said, the fighting would go mostly in one day. And basically what decided when the battle stopped this point was when the general, the king, left. And that's that's why he was able to win this battle and this battle, because these two were the Persians were under the command of the king, Darius. So what Alexander did was he basically launched all his cavalry at him. He went right after him, and he was not a general. He was a coward. So as soon as he saw all the Macedonian cavalry coming at him, he fled the battlefield. So if you're a Persian soldier, you look back and you see that your king is running away, you're running. So
Go.
I got one more question.
okay.
Are you seeing the movie 300? And one of their battle tactics, they collected all the dead bodies and put it up like a little wall or whatever.
Oh, the wall, yeah.
But they did the same thing back in the day too?
Well, that would fall actually, I'm glad you said, that would fall under psychological warfare. I know they did that. That is called the Evoución wall. That's what it was called, the one they made up with the bodies.
Mm-hmm.
That happened. At this point, I don't know if Alexander did any of that, but I can tell you that the Assyrians and the Huns later, what they would do is they would collect, after the battle, they would cut the heads of all the enemies who died, and they would put it up in sticks, and they would just make like a road with the sticks on the sides. So it would be like a road, and the side would be all sticks with the heads on top of it. So it was like a message to them, like they did stuff like that. And for example, I knew the Germans also, they used to cut the fingers of the Romans, because a lot of them had rings and jewelry. They would just cut their hands or cut their fingers. They would do stuff like that. I think the only thing that Alexander did once was when he was around this area. Where was it? Around Syria. Around this area. No, it was over here. It was at the tail of the Sogdian knot. But anyways, when he was over there, he found a town of Greeks in the heart of the Persian Empire. And you know, it was very weird because he was marching through Persia, and suddenly he finds this town where people speak Greek. So he was like, how do they speak Greek? How are they just in the middle of Persia like that? And he made kind of he asked around, and he actually found out that that town was originally founded by the Greek mercenaries who helped the Persians fight the Greeks 150 years earlier in the Medic Wars, which is the Battle of the 300. That's the war that belongs to. So, you know, he was disgusted by it. They were basically the successors of the traders who helped the Persians fight the Greeks. So what he did was he took them out of the desert. I think he took the eyes out of all of them except one, so he could guide them across the desert, something like that. And you know, so that was a message for everybody to see that traders were not going to be kind of, you know, tolerated. Yeah, Alexander was very rough. He had no mercy with anybody, you know. And, you know, I told you the story like in a romantic way, you know, this great general who did great things, but if you get to the core of it, he was very cruel. Very, very cruel.
Very good, thank you. You have a third portion of this?
Yeah, the last one will deal with Rome, all of Rome, and that will be the end of it.
Sounds good, thank you. Okay guys, I appreciate you staying. I'll take roll, and that'll be it for tonight. And how many people still need to present? Okay, we'll start presenting again next Tuesday when you come. Okay, so, okay. Bowens?
Right.
Good questions tonight.
Thank you.
Good questions. Braxton? Cook? Dyke? Nomo?
Mr. Gonzalez, how you get stopped the